Mr. Andy Clarke. Hello.
How the devil are you? There was something familiar about this face that came over the internet to me. I can't remember the last time I actually saw you.
That's why we're doing this. That's why we're doing this. So this is what we're going to get into is catching up. And so that's why I'm going to get into the first question, which is what has you waking up excited these days? It's been a while.
It has been a while. I've become very nostalgic over the past couple of years. And I don't know whether it's an age thing or a kind of, stakes place in your life thing, but I've been doing a lot of dwelling and a lot of kind of, remembering some of the things that I used to get up to. We can talk about whether collecting is a disease or not, because I'm sure that somebody would say that it's some kind of psychiatric condition. But I've actually started collecting things, and this is part, sorry for the audio listeners, but I will try to describe what this thing is. This is part of a 1990s Sinar P2 5x4-inch camera. This is the rear standard bearer, the bit where the film went in the thing on the top of what we would call a view camera. And if you imagine those professional cameras that, you used to see people using where, there'd be a front bit and a back bit, and in the middle there'd be bellows. Well, this is part of a Swiss camera from the 1990s. And I picked this up in a shop in Vienna in Austria a couple of weeks ago. And it was an absolute bargain because this thing is mint. I've got the entire camera. I've got it in parts on my desk because I'm kind of, oiling it and cleaning it and doing the stuff. But I used to sell these cameras. I worked for this company back in the early 1990s. And this was a Swiss company based in Schaffhausen in northern Switzerland, southern Germany, on the border on the Rhine Falls. Not very far away, actually, from where I think you and I last saw each other, which was in Freiburg.
Yeah.
It's probably an hour or so from there. And I've been collecting bits of history. And I'm putting this together at the moment. It's all in pieces on my desk. But I have all the bits to make it work, except that, of course, you can't really shoot 5x4-inch film anymore. Or at least not easily. So this is part of it. And if you want to know what the other bit looks like when it's on the front, I picked this up. I had to have this shipped from Japan. That's how serious I've become on this kind of stuff. This is a 90mm Schneider Super Angulon large format lens, which in the day would have been, well over £1,000. I managed to get it for a lot cheaper than that. But this camera is my baby. It's going to go on a tripod over there in the studio, and it's going to look absolutely awesome. And it's going to remind me of the sort of stuff that I used to be involved with before the web and before all this other stuff. And you can't see unless you actually, unless you get your hands on this kind of thing. But this is a serious piece of machinery. The gears, the racking, all this kind of stuff is absolutely incredible. And, this company was known for it. And I used to go to Schaffhausen quite regularly when they would have kind of, sales events or new product launches or all this kind of stuff. So I've always had a bit of a soft spot for Schaffhausen, which is why I'm wearing an IWC watch as well, because they're based in Schaffhausen. But this thing is absolutely incredible. It's just a kind of a reminder of not only kind of what I used to do all those years ago, but the stuff that we did and had to use to take pictures, even as as little time ago as the 90s. I say that, and it's like that's like 40 years. This is what's getting me excited at the moment, is putting my Sinar together, which hopefully by the end of the week I'll have done. But it's epic. This thing is so heavy. I mean, the whole camera.
It looks it.
Yeah,
it looks it. It like you could tell, you could see the craft, the machine like the precision. You could tell there's the craftsmanship, there's the legendary Swiss precision and all of that stuff. But you're tying a lot together because, like you said, there's this nostalgia there. This is it doesn't just sound like, oh yeah, I worked in a camera shop for a hot second. It sounds like this was like a real part of your early career, I guess, or was it? Yeah, this is like you actually going to this place, so you have this like connection to it that isn't just beyond like, oh, I think that this looks really cool. It sounds like you obviously have an appreciation for the craftsmanship and the design of this thing, but it's also you're tying the history and the geography and your life's journey together through it, as well as the format that is something that we take for granted now, that we can just generate and snap off, 1,000 photos in a second, and just the size and the awkward, like just how bulky it all is and stuff too. You're just kind of like, wow, it's difficult to go back to that place.
I see. If you want a sort of a potted history, I went to art school back in the 80s thinking that I was going to be, David Hockney, and a fabulous painter. And it turned out after about 3 or 4 days, I realized that compared to everybody else, I was a terrible painter. And, there were people who I was at art school with that, were like super talented. And I wasn't. I think I'd, like most things in my life, I think I'd kind of blagged my way into it. Ended up spending most of my time in either the printmaking studio in the darkroom. And I was very seriously into photography for a long time. When art school finished, I moved down to London, and I thought I would go and work with a photographer. And the usual route was that you apprenticed and, you spent several years working under a photographer, loading film and painting walls and making tea. I actually ended up working in a car photography studio. And this place, it was essentially like an Amazon warehouse in the scale of it. But if you imagine when if you take a photograph of a tin of beans, generally speaking, in the pre-digital age, there would be some form of kind of, curved background, infinity kind of looking background, usually paper on a thing. Now, if you're photographing a car, that thing has to be 100 feet wide and 80 feet tall. So I ended up working in this car photography studio and as an assistant, and it was hard work, and I got nowhere near photography at all. It was all literally laboring. It was either painting the stage after a shoot or before a shoot or sometimes during a shoot. It was incredible the way that I can still remember some of those things, how they were done. This is pre-digital. This is pre-Photoshop. It's pre-retouching. And if you wanted to take a photograph of a car and you wanted the impression that the wheels were moving, what you would do is you would take a photograph with the wheels in one place, and then you would literally lift the car up, move the wheels, drop it down, take another exposure, lift it up. And you do like 8 exposures on the same piece of film to lift this thing up. The famous one was actually a shoot for, I'll never forget this. It was a shoot for a Fiat Tipo, which was like a little tiny, I don't know what you'd call it now, compact. And the campaign had this Fiat literally sitting on the top of a mountain, except that the mountain, the sky behind the mountain was literally painted on this infinity curve. And it took a painter and his team 2 weeks to paint the sky. And then there was a scaffolding tower, and the Fiat was put on top of the scaffolding tower. And I was the only one of these assistants that actually weirdly had a forklift truck driving license. So it came down to me to actually lift this car on top of this scaffold tower and just like drop it down. Really scary stuff. And then the set designer took very, very thick, 1 foot thick, 8x4 sheets of polystyrene, and then carved it with a hot knife to create the rocks that were underneath the car. It's all painted, airbrushed, and painted up. And then to to create the impression of like of a load of kind of, low cloud, so that there was all the low cloud and then the car was on the top of the mountain just peeking out of the cloud. To create that effect, they've got about 8 shopping carts, strapped a load of chicken wire to them and covered that chicken wire in cotton wool, and then got about 8 volunteers to literally move the shopping carts backwards and forwards around for, like a minute-long exposure, and it created this thing. That was how stuff was done. I mean, this would be probably 80, so only a few years before my Sinar was born. So I kind of got into photography like that. And this company, they obviously lots of photographers came and went through the studio. And then I went to one of the big trade shows, and it was up in, I think it was Birmingham at the time. So I went to this trade show, and I'm kind of talking to a bunch of people, and I'm talking to the company that sold Sinar in the UK, and got talking to them, and they were looking for a sales guy, but they wanted like, I don't know what we call it now. I suppose it'd be like the old school equivalent of like a developer evangelist. They wanted somebody that knew a bit about photography.
That knew the craft. Yeah.
Exactly. Well, I didn't know the craft, but, I could talk a good game. So I actually ended up working for this company, and then the Swiss, Sinar. And that was my route into working in photography industry. And I took a complete detour away from the kind of the creative side, and got much more into, technical and sales and all that kind of stuff. And that was a big kind of career pivot for a good few years. So that's kind of one of the reasons why I think back to some of the stories that, some of the things that I remember from those days of literally going out selling this stuff. And it sticks with me today. There was my boss at the time, Kevin Turner, bless his soul. He used to have some real catchphrases. He was a natural salesperson, and would say things like, well, the deal's not done until the checks stop bouncing. And, we would lose deals to competitors, and he would not give up. Even after they'd said to him, Kevin, no, we're buying something else. He was like a dog with a bone. And there was one particular day I remember when the competitor had actually delivered all of their equipment to this client studio. Kevin struck a deal with them, and literally our van driver collected the competitor's kit and delivered it back to them. So it was a bit of a circus. But, it's those kind of things that you kind of look back on and think, it was sometimes really miserable at the time, but, you end up with a few stories to tell.
Well, not just that though, like, because as you're describing literally all of this and how I know you as art director, web person that cares about the craft, agency owner, someone out there that's been having to create, package, sell, deliver, do all of that over a long period of time. It's like all of that experience totally checks out, and I can totally see all of those transferable skills, as we call them, and and all of that stuff is like we kind of have no choice but to be shaped by those earlier experiences, and we carry all of it with us. And because a lot of people think, and I'm curious to get your take on it, because something like that, oh yeah, like I kind of had this journey in camera equipment sales. And there's quite a few people out there, I think, that would say, "Oh yeah, like, and that was like a mistake, or that was like a weird like detour." And yeah, it doesn't seem like you see it that way.
No, I there were lots of aspects of being in sales that I did not like at all, and I didn't like the pressure of having to meet numbers. I found that to be not in my character at all. I loved the industry and the people and the craft, the technology that kind of went behind it. If you talk to you talk to a lot of people, they'll have a very negative impression of salespeople. We've all been sold to badly. I was attempted to be sold to very badly fairly recently because we're having double glazing fitted in our cottage. For the first time in 30 years, we might actually be warm in the winter. But, we got 3 quotes to come round, and, there were 3 guys that came, and one of them was, very enthusiastic about the product and really knew things and had ideas and was a charming chap. But then there was the other chap who sold badly. And, he wasn't quite one of those salesmen that wouldn't leave unless he'd got a signature. But it was the sort of thing where, he was then constantly pestering you afterwards to, have you made a decision? Have you thought about this?
Yeah.
We've got a special promotion coming in next week if you sign now. We've all been sold to badly, but the being sold to well when you have a need is actually a really good skill. And I always remember Kevin saying that there are 3 types of customers. There's the customer that knows he's got a problem and he knows how to solve it, and he's just looking to buy something. Those are the customers that we don't want. They know what they want. It's a race to the bottom, and it's the lowest price wins. Then you've got a customer that knows he's got a problem, doesn't know how to solve it, and then you're in with a chance of being able to propose a solution, and, hopefully he believes in your message. And the third type of customer is the one that doesn't know he's got a problem. Of course, he doesn't know how to solve it. And then you're there to basically not just fulfill a need, but kind of create a need.
Yeah.
And it's that kind of thing, I think, which is, it's just as valuable in creative or technical services than it is in selling cameras 40 years ago. Because, you're really thinking about, what can I do that is going to actually meaningfully improve somebody's business or marketing or performance or style guide or whatever it might be. And then being able to articulate that and take people along the journey with you so that they're able to then go, yeah, that was good. He knew what he was talking about. And then they're really happy with the end result and will continue to buy. That's something that I've kind of, carried with me all these years.
Yeah.
And, some people will say, sales is just manipulation. I'm sure that our old friend Jeremy Keith would be. We've had lots of heated discussions about advertising over the years, and what he considers to be evil or manipulative or whatever. But good advertising, good sales is an art, not just it's not even just a skill. It's an absolute art. And I think we can. It's not something which if I'm designing a website. And I say, look, I've had this great idea. I've got to be able to articulate it. And I've got to be able to, reason it out with you and tell you why I think that this is the better solution than another solution. And do that with conviction. And I don't know whether young people sort of appreciate that. Do you?
There does seem to be, I think, a generational dynamic in play. I think you have a lot of kind of like the digital side of things, as well as now COVID and stuff when it comes to just kind of interpersonal communication. I think that some things have shifted for sure. All of this adds up to there is I like how you just said it. It's an art form, but there's also just a real authenticity to it. And that's I think the thing that I've come to appreciate over the years in my own career trajectory, working for agencies where we, doing work with Nike and MasterCard and whatever. And you're around the kind of like bullshitty kind of parts, but then you're also around the, here's these kind of like real things that are solving real problems. And, you're kind of connecting the dots. And like, I got to see that at this like mega scale, but like bringing that into my own world and my own work to be able to have a conversation with somebody. And I like how you got involved with the camera company is it's like, yeah, you need to actually live in that world and be able to connect with people over the craft and to be able to genuinely understand the kinds of problems that they're up against. And I like how you said it. It's like whenever you are feeling the impact of those problems, so you're just like swimming or frustrated, or you're just, sometimes you do know what's causing that, but a lot of times like you don't, or you have a directional notion. Having someone who's able to kind of come in and say, hey, looks like you've got some problems and I want to better understand them, and I also have some ways that we can address those things. And it is just, you sometimes just see the literal shoulders drop. You see that like tension. It's like, oh, good. Like somebody who knows what they're talking about is here. They're actually invested in what I'm wrestling with, and there's sensible and reasonable, and there are solutions to these problems, and that's design in a nutshell, right?
I don't know whether you've seen it, because obviously I don't know when this is going to go out, but as we record this, we are in the middle of the FIFA World Cup, which sadly is taking place in the US. This has been kind of all over the socials over the last week or so, but the Heinz condiment company, their response to not being able to have their branded goods on display. Have you seen this?
I haven't, but Heinz is a Pittsburgh company, so I should.
The long and short of it is that FIFA, the world governing body of football, has its own sponsors. And when it comes to an event like the World Cup, only their sponsor logos are allowed to be visible. We've had this thing with Levi's and with Gillette, who sponsor stadiums. It's gone from being the Gillette Stadium to the, I don't know, San Francisco Stadium or whatever it happens to be. Boston, yeah, sure. I think it is. It might be Boston. They've had to cover up their signage on these stadiums. But the really clever thing has been how they've covered them up. So Gillette, for example, covered up their logo in what looks like an enormous blob of shaving foam. So, you know what the place is. But the absolute best one was Heinz, because if you go to, the concession stand, to get a hot dog at the game, obviously you're going to want mustard or mayonnaise or ketchup to go with it. So they're using Heinz. Heinz is the brand that they're using. Stadium's been forced to cover up Heinz on all of their bottles, leaving tomato ketchup or mayonnaise or mustard or whatever it is. But it's like the Epstein files for ketchup.
Where, redacted ketchup,
where Heinz has been redacted. So what Heinz have done is they've actually launched their own range of condiments, and they are for sale in Canada, I think, which have actually got the redaction printed on the label, and they're calling it unofficial stadium ketchup.
Beautiful.
Which I think is great. And somebody should get a massive pay rise.
It's so fascinating, and it gets into the stew of like a lot of the world that we operate in, that the world of branding, the world of kind of visual communication there's just all sorts of dynamics and systems and things in play that just lead to these really wild and bizarre situations. But it's that money dance on full display. It's kind of hilarious because
it was absolute genius. But you see, it makes me wonder sometimes where on the web do we get that kind of high level creative thinking? Does it purely happen in ad agencies? Because you don't see that kind of creative stuff generally. I don't trickle down to people's experiences of products or websites.
You touched on it like right out of the gate. You what you described with that Fiat photo shoot is like just straight up set design for a movie, right? It's like there's a physicality to it. There's just multimedia art on full display, right? And it's doing a specific job, right? It's through the lens of an advertisement, but it's like that's just a straight up
art shoot.
And it does feel that over time, and translated into the digital world, and especially now, there has been this kind of flattening that has happened of a lot of the multidimensionality of the rest of just the world of physics of the world the world of atoms, and does that actually translate into the world of bits? And I think that we've seen some really interesting things happen over the course of the last few decades of the web, where there is a utilitarian aspect to, cool, I'm coming on to this website to get something done, or I'm, working through a flow, and by all means, like, yeah, get out of the way. Don't try to like stuff your stuff. Don't try to be whatever. But there's a time and a place for a lot of things. And I do think that there is that more creative or inventive or whatever stuff that used to be kind of what I'd get into a little bit in the ad agency world, where you're like, oh, okay, this is like a little like clever thing for Tiffany and Company, where it's like you could like drop a pin and like be like, here's where you and your sweetheart met, or where they proposed, and you ended up with this like beautiful kind of map all over the world of like where people's, like got together with their sweetheart and stuff. You're like, that's neat. I like that. It's special. It's inventive. You're wielding the technologies available to us at the time that are emerging, and you're doing kind of things that are a little bit outside the norm. It's not just like totally there to just only get you into a checkout flow, but it's there to just like help with a bit of just storytelling or connection or just fun or all of that stuff. And it feels like those things have been fewer and further between, I think, as the years go by.
I've been very lucky, but over the last few years, I've kind of developed an accidental niche working with composers, either, movie composers or video game composers. And, these are very talented individuals. And they seem to think that when they come to me, they're going to get something which hopefully reflects a little bit about their personality or demonstrates their work without just being, an audio player or whatever you call it, things, histograms or whatever.
Yeah.
And I've had a lot of fun. I found those things really, really satisfying, because I do still think that there's a market for good storytelling online. And it doesn't really matter what you're doing. I've just done a job with a company that sells thermal printer cartridges, which, it's not Nike, but this company has a story to tell, and their story is all about what the stuff that they make gets printed onto packaging, generally food packaging. If the print thing runs, then the production line stops. Therefore, just-in-time delivery. And one of the guys actually said to me, it's a bit of an art, really, knowing when somebody's going to need something. And that kind of got me thinking. And I know it's a cheesy idea, but I ended up actually spending a week reproducing famous paintings using QR codes. So I'm sure it's not a novel idea, but it was certainly, it was appropriate to this particular job. That's the other thing, going back to your kind of, your original question about what gets you excited in the morning. And it's good ideas, clever ideas, clever storytelling. And it doesn't matter to me what the medium is. It can be film, it can be music, it can be web or digital stuff or whatever.
Do you see yourself oscillating between those different worlds? Is it a morning by morning thing, or do you feel like do you go into a zone and kind of get tunnel vision when you're pursuing an idea, or do you find yourself kind of like a bee pollinating many flowers, or kind of flitting across different mediums over the course of, say, a month? Or do you like get dialed in? Do you go deep or broad?
I don't know whether it's an ADHD thing, but I find it incredibly difficult to concentrate. And the older I get, the worse it is. I am the world's worst multitasker. I will often have to set aside time where I know that I'm not dealing with anything else and I really need to actively focus on something. So this week is all about coming up with a whole set of graphic illustrations for, for another small business client. So, the web part of it was actually done within a few days, but, out of a months long project, the vast majority of it is going to be coming up with the ideas and copywriting and typesetting.
Yeah.
Doing all of that. And it's got to that stage in the job where I'm really having to kind of focus on kind of the look and feel. And that comes down to, how do I illustrate the concepts, the real thing, the real benefits of what it is that this company does? How can I kind of illustrate that visually?
It sounds like there's a time, and it sounds like you give yourself some permission to live in that world where you're not focusing, but then you're like, right, it's go time. You kind of know when that threshold gets crossed, and you need to like really actively design like the space and the time to be able to stay there. Yeah.
I mean, I've been traveling for the last few weeks, and I haven't really done any. I've got a lot done over the last 3-4 weeks or so. I've completely rebuilt my own website from the ground up. I've done some client stuff. I've done some building. I've done some writing. I've done some bits and pieces. But that's all kind of like busy work that I can sort of do anywhere. It's the sort of thing where I can do that in a coffee shop, or I can do it in a service station if I decide to take a break from driving for an hour. But actually, I do need this space or a space that I can kind of make my own if I'm really going to sit and focus.
How do you find your environment, like that gas station session? How do you find that environment influences your work, or does it? Do you feel like it does, or not? Even if it is like busy work, do you feel the impacts of where you're at, especially if you are traveling? Do you feel like that finds its way in somehow, or are you?
No, not so much. Not so much. I mean, I had a very, very pleasant day on Friday. I said to Sue, I'm not coming out with you today. I'm going to go and find a cafe, and I'm going to sit by a lake, and I'm going to do some stuff. I don't find the environment particularly affects it. It's much more about being able to get inside your own head.
Yeah.
And I actually do need a certain amount of distractions. It drives Sue nuts, but even when I'm, designing something, or I'm really trying to focus, there is always a film on. I've got an iMac sitting in front of me. There is always a film on. I'll watch the same movie over and over and over again. Or there's music on, and it's not. Some people go, "Yeah, I can only listen to Tchaikovsky when I'm working."
Sure.
But I've got to have something, and I've learned actually that if your brain kind of, there's 100% of it. If work takes up 80%, then unless I have something to fill up the other 20%, I'm not productive. And if I don't have a film on, or I don't have music on, or something like that, it's then that my stupid brain starts to wander, and I get distracted, and I think, oh, who was that actor that starred in that TV show? And then I'm kind of, fucking Wikipedia rabbit hole.
You need the entire thing to be filled up, your entire attention to be preoccupied, else it's going to wander. Yeah, that's fascinating. I see that play out in my own work and stuff as well, where it's there's something to beat and rhythm for me specifically that plays a real big part, right? When we talk about beat or groove or whatever, we're often talking about there's a directionality to it, right? It's going somewhere, right? There's the passage of time, and there's this rhythm that's moving forward. Like, we feel a sense of movement forward. We rarely feel music takes us backwards or keeps us standing still. It's taking us somewhere. and it's, in my experience of it, it's always forward. Right? In the literal sense, it is, because it's, sound produced over time. But there's something experiential to it, that you just kind of have this thing that when it's on, it's just kind of immediately moving me forward. And when I hitch that up to work, or what I'm trying to apply my conscious mind to, I find that really helps me forward. It moves me forward. It plays a role in moving my own shit forward.
Yeah, I don't find does that necessarily for me. Whether it would be listening to, country music or Motorhead, doesn't really make much of a difference. I don't work quicker when I'm listening to Motorhead than I am when I'm listening to Miranda Lambert.
Right.
But it's more about occupying the misbehaving parts of my brain.
Yeah. You are using it as like to tamp down the kind of parts that are going to distract or preoccupy you, and kind of keep it. It's almost like a white noise machine that just kind of keeps that part placated, so that you're able to focus on what needs to be done. That's fascinating. I think that's really
cannabis.
cool.
Yeah, musical cannabis.
But it's interesting to say, because since you're saying that, you'll often have a film running, now that's a visual experience, that's dialogue, that's whatever. And like you were saying with people in Tchaikovsky, where it's just like, oh yeah, I can't work with lyrics, or, music with lyrics, or a podcast playing or something like that feels like it's pulling that part, the language center of your brain, away. But it sounds like that's not an issue for you.
No, the only time when I've got to have everything completely distraction free is when I'm writing. And I can't have anybody in the same room when I'm writing. Somebody moving a chair is going to really irritate me. Well, actually, I say that. Sue moving a chair, she's the only one that's in the house apart from me. She's going to irritate me moving that chair. So I do have to have everything completely quiet, because I've got this technique that I was taught many, many, many years ago, which is to actually have a conversation with the reader. So, I'm writing for you, and I'm having a conversation with you about this thing. And so therefore I can't have any kind of, extraneous noise or distractions. But apart from that, but I quite like it. It's I do try to get out of the house, at least twice a week. I try to leave the house.
Hashtag life goals. Get out of the house twice.
Exactly. One day, Scoob's going to come up here and she's just going to find me kind of desiccated at my desk. Cobwebs. And he died at his max.
There is something, it's a very strange sense of perspective, because I think about it a lot. I'm hanging out at my house, for a good bit of my time. Yeah, I need to get out of the house more. We're working on it. It's been a journey. It's been a process. In certain respects, depending on how you'd look at it, right? If you're not at all in this field, or don't value or work on the same things that I'm working on, you would look at that and go, oh, that just seems like what a miserable and solitary existence. And yet I don't feel that way at all. It's like, here are these just kind of rich worlds. Here are all the people that I know. Here are all of it's very, very, very fascinating. I'm pretty good at exploring the physical world. Very, very bad at, whenever I'm home, I'm usually a homebody. And there was a period of time where that was really, really necessary. But now I'm kind of like trying to overcome that and kind of just reconnect with just like maybe I should just, rather than make yet another peanut butter and jelly sandwich, I should probably go out and have a meal somewhere that isn't my house. So
yeah, I mean, it's not like things could be worse, couldn't they? I mean, there's a very nice one. Look, Is that the Rickenbacker that's sitting
Yeah,
behind you?
yeah.
You've got your Rickenbacker. I've got a Sinar on my desk, and a whole load of Godzilla action figures lining the walls. So it's not like we're kind of working in the coal mine.
Yeah.
So we mustn't grumble too much.
Yeah. Well,
about
but that is we've kind of built these comfortable little cocoons, but they're creative cocoons as well, right? And I think I'm fascinated by that because, for people to do impactful work, often for the benefit of others, it requires a certain level of solitude or focus or disconnection from other people. It almost seems kind of counterintuitive or counterproductive, right? It's like, oh yeah, if you're like trying to make good art or make good music or make good work or design good things that are in pursuit of helping other people or putting beautiful things out into the world for the benefit of others, you'd think, oh yeah, well, you want to be out amongst them. In practice, you kind of need that head down time. You need that, even if you're, like you're saying, like even if you're in a cafe or something, it's like putting like the headphones on. I think a lot of people are like, it doesn't necessarily compute. And I could see how there is this disconnect in perspective where it's just like, oh, look at how depressing this is. Like you're at a beautiful lake and you're staring at a fucking computer, right? Like, what are you doing with your life? And it's like, well, living your best life, right? Because you know that what's in that computer is not totally distracting
exactly.
from the lake.
Exactly. And I'm sitting here for a few hours with my computer by the lake, but I'm not spending 50 weeks of the year working in a grocery store. So I'm very lucky to be able to do that kind of thing. Well, have you ever worked for somebody or worked in a building with lots and lots of other people? Have you ever worked in like a big open plans or whatever? Have you done that?
I have. My very first job, I was, in cubicles adjacent to the accounting department wearing a business casual and going, this is what adult work is. I just kind of assumed that's what it was, and eventually kind of changed out of that. But yeah, that was a trip. But then ultimately I found myself in these rooms with a small handful of people. And that was very interesting. Kind of working first in New York City, a little Soho apartment with like 6 people tops. Like I think I was like number 3 or maybe 4 whenever I got there. And then there's, 6 or 7 people by the end of it. And then working at RGA, my wife and I had different experiences in literally the same building because she worked in a big kind of open plan part of the office where there's just all sorts of activity and people coming and going and passing through and all of that stuff, which is really tough for ADHD, I think. And then there was me that I was in a converted conference room that got holed up with just a handful of people. And we kind of created our little kind of subculture within that room. And that, I think back very fondly to those times because we kind of like were protected from what's since come out about like open plans, open office plans and stuff, and just like how not conducive to good work they are in many respects. So it was like, oh yeah, I was kind of like holed up with like a little like family, and like we had our own little culture going. So
I mean, I worked for I went and lived in Australia for a couple of years. I worked for a fintech company down there in Sydney that had one of these great big open plan offices. There's like 80 people in there. There's everybody from the CEO to the office manager to the marketing and support and the technical teams and me. And, on one hand, you might think to yourself, well, I'm going to find that really energizing. You've got all these people moving around. It's buzzing, this kind of stuff. Found it hateful and exhausting. And after a couple of months, I discovered that this company they rented a flat, an apartment, or a set of rooms above the barber shop, which was over the road. And it was sort of like a bit of an overflow space.
Yeah.
And I discovered this space. So I would go into work in the morning and pretend to enjoy it. And then, everybody would go for lunch. And then after lunch, I would disappear. Yeah. And I would take over one of these rooms. And ultimately, I thought, it sounds like I'm sort of like a bird or something. But, over time, it got filled up with my shit. And I took a bookcase. I bought a bookcase and put it in this space and had my books on it. And they
you just like organically found and designed the space that you needed in order to do what you needed to do. It's like your body rejected that environment, and so you found the way to find an environment and design and create the environment that you needed, and that's beautiful.
It was not a very successful job or what experience, but it did teach me that I'm not cut out for working in any kind of space like that at all.
Those experiences are important, right? And I could say that about a good bit of my early career experience was learning what not to do. You're shaped a certain way. You have a certain disposition. You have a certain mind. You have a certain we all have preferences. We all have, our definition of comfort is different from human being to human being, right? So it does become this really fascinating thing. And that's why I think that in this moment in time, I feel like there's, over the last, say, 2 years, there's been the trend of like, oh yes, return to the office, right? After kind of post-COVID, where everybody kind of got comfortable with this flexibility, which is why it just feels so absurd almost to kind of go, cool, so everybody's got their own rich lives. We all have our individual preferences, our own individual comforts, our own individual working styles, our own individual just everything. Yes, we want to collaborate and coordinate and communicate with the other people that we're working with. That's also an instinct that we all share. But that's why like those return to office decrees by management feel just so ham-handed and just course, and just it just feels, it's this like flattening of, it's like for a lot of people, I think they got that taste of what we get to experience a lot, which is we're surrounded by our stuff, our comfort. We've created our own little like kind of creative cocoons, and now all of a sudden the boss is saying, nope, you gotta make that commute and get back into an environment that's like been demonstrated to be counterproductive.
It's weird. Things actually done. It is. It's strange when you sort of sit back and think about it. I always sort of felt slightly rebellious, even going over and like leaving the office and working on my own over the road, felt kind of rebellious. But I think in hindsight that I have built a physical space, and I built a mental space, and I built a job around my need to work in a certain way or be a certain way. And I've sort of realized that no, I'm not cut out to be around people every day. And I'm not cut out for having to appear to be on all the time. If I decide that I want to get out of bed at 11 o'clock in the morning and work until 3 a.m., well, I will do, and I'll probably do my best work after midnight.
Yeah.
And if I decide that I want to sit and fiddle with, oiling large format cameras for an afternoon, well, I can. And I've kind of built my working life around that, almost as a way of, I think, either compensating for or coping with the ridiculous blob of goo between my ears.
Yeah. ADHD in general is it's a very challenging thing in that in so many respects it's just, oh, well, it sounds like you're just interested in a bunch of different things, and from moment to moment or day to day you feel like pursuing a certain thing, or yeah,
Yeah.
like it's time to play with some gear, or it's time to it's like, is that a bad thing to
I
have just vast and varied like interests and actually like act on them? It's like, no. But then there's like, oh yeah, then there's this thing called, you know, responsibility, and clients are expecting things, or people are expecting things from me. I think that that's the balance. But it sounds like you've been able to just be, it's a, would you say that it's just like been like an iterative process to get to a place where you're able to arrive at that, waking up at 11, going to bed at 3 a.m. on a certain day, but not necessarily doing that, religiously or all the time, but to just like kind of meet the day and your energy and your
yeah,
headspace where it's at for the day?
I do tend to work late. I rarely go to bed before 2 a.m. And quite often I will gravitate to coming back up here and doing various things. And it's just a rhythm that I've kind of got into.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sue's a morning person. She always used to joke that we could cover 24-hour technical support because she's up at 6 and I don't go to bed
Yeah.
until 2.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's very kind of interesting. And I know that there's the two of us living the dream, surrounded by Rickenbackers and Godzillas, talking about the perils of ADHD. I know that there are people that really, really suffer with this stuff and
Yeah.
cannot get through the day, cannot maintain a relationship or hold down a job or make sure that their bills are paid or whatever. And I've never had an actual diagnosis. I've never taken any medication for it. I just think that it sort of makes a little bit of sense when it comes to my kind of weird brain chemistry.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah.
that's not to disrespect or play down, the struggles that I know a
Yeah.
lot of people have.
Yeah. And my experience of it, and as I've kind of gotten a formal diagnosis of it in recent years, actually, it's that second D that becomes important, because there are certain qualities to it that a lot of people in this moment right now, like the mental health community and science community in general, is just like, is this even really a disorder, or more of just like, it's kind of a way of being? And the disorder part is this is actually getting in the way of my ability to move things across a finish line in any way, shape, or form, or like you're saying, like hold down a relationship, or being able, to function, right? And so I think that it is important for the people who really feel that is genuinely disrupting their lives, and that they find themselves frustrated, that it's like, yeah, like I can't do that. Like that's the stuff where it's just like, please address it. Like the beautiful thing about it is that there are treatments for it. Go do it. Like whenever I did it, it was it's kind of like a survey, and they gave Melissa a survey as well, and as well as like, I think maybe even some other people, like maybe my mom got one as well. But it's just like, and then I like returned it, right? And it's just like, they looked at it, and then they gave me a diagnosis, and I got put on some medicine, and it definitely like helped get the parts where I'm just like, yeah, I feel like I'm just like treading water and not going anywhere, to a place where I'm like, yes, I actually feel like these strokes are actually leading to some forward movement, and I get some clarity out of it. So it's like, it's very interesting, because I still retain that same, I think what you're describing quite well, which is just this diversity of interests and wanting to be able to like kind of follow your energy in your head wherever it's pointed, and to have the space to be able to do that. Like, I think that's a beautiful thing. That just means like you're interested in a lot of things. You could play with things. You'll make forward progress on certain things. And the cool thing is through that diversity, through pollinating all those different flowers, you like bring all of that experience, that breath to whatever it is you're doing. Versus if you're to totally put on horse blinders and just focus on that one thing, you're not going to have that same perspective. So in many respects, I feel like the attention deficit part of it is pretty beautiful, and is, I think a lot of people are rethinking that as well, that's more just a way of being rather than a disorder. But it's whenever you're getting drawn and quartered and you're not able to get anything done, it's that second D. That is they
call it executive dysfunction, I think, is part of it. And that's not, that's not kind of, executives in business. That's like actually executing something, not literally not being able to, sit down and pay a bill or, or concentrate or whatever.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting, actually, because there's, when I was dicking around in the 90s with large format cameras, nobody would ever, I don't even know whether the term had been, invented at that point. So it's a very short space of time where we've kind of become, aware and probably accepting in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I wanted to talk to you about this just because you were, to my knowledge, and I'd have to think hard, but I think that you were the first person that I really saw in any sort of like full-throated way kind of talk about mental illness and mental health. I think we would never have heard the words, neuro and diverse in the same sentence. Yeah.
Back in the time. It's actually funny you bring that up, actually, because I've been doing a bit of family digging over the last year or so. And, without kind of turning this podcast into kind of, some kind of mournful exercise, but, back in 1978, my dad committed suicide, and I was not around at the time and never knew him particularly. I might have been one or two really when we were together. But I always grew up with about him in the context of what he ended up doing, and trying almost to kind of rationalize what he did and what must have sort of taken him to that, to that place. And it's interesting, if you look at, I think it was one of my last books, which I dedicated to him, and I actually wrote, he suffered from what we would call today, bipolar disorder. But actually, I've been doing some really interesting thoughts. I thought to myself, right, before they all die, I'm actually going to talk to people that knew him, and find out a little bit more. Even to the point where, I found out that he liked football and he supported Preston North End, football club. Those kind of little details about people that, are, to anybody else are completely meaningless. But I spent some time, and I've actually, I need to write these up, but I actually recorded the conversations.
Beautiful.
With people that knew him at the time. And he had a very, very tragic story. He was around 10 or 11 and had a younger sister. And he was playing football on, the community football pitch, which was near a canal. His little sister, who was probably about 5 at the time, was playing near the canal and fell in and drowned.
Oh, my goodness.
And he was blamed by, particularly by his father. And then the abuse and this kind of stuff. And through talking to people and and listening to how they described him as an adult, has led me to the conclusion that he didn't necessarily suffer from a bipolar disorder, or as they would call it back in the day, manic depression, where you've got, the highs and the lows.
Yeah.
I think that it was much more of almost like PTSD.
Yeah. Trauma. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
And his
unresolved trauma. Like,
yeah, and his need to absolutely control his environment, to the point where he was obsessive and controlling and manipulative, and would do things like count the number of slices of bread that were left when he went to work. On the very rare occasion that he went to work, he couldn't hold down a job, but he would count the number of slices of bread and make sure that there was exactly the same number when he came home, because he was controlling, his family and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But what became interesting, I've always just lived under the impression that maybe a little bit of my kind of gelatinous brain chemistry was genetic. And I know that Alex has often wondered about their brain chemistry and thinking, is this something that, that is hereditary? But I've actually come to the conclusion that and that's been quite a relief, actually. I've been, over the last sort of 3 to 4 months, I've actually been really paring down my, to the point where I'm on virtually none right now. I might take 1 pill a week, and that, I might leave that another 3 months and then stop that entirely. So that's actually been quite a kind of a revelation, really.
That's fascinating. Like, because it's back to what you're talking about earlier. There's the kind of like storytelling, and when we think about these things, especially with just such tragedy and all of that, and we're told these stories that it's just, okay, yep, these things like are genetic, and if you convince yourself of that, and to be fair, there absolutely are genetic components to these things. But I think that one of the biggest things that I've learned, since Melissa's now like a licensed like therapist, and so I've like learned a lot just by way of like kind of being on the other end of it. It's like there's your genes, but then there's your specific lived life, and a lot of those genes like either don't come online because you've never been in contact with the environmental things that would cause those things to activate, those kind of, chemical reactions to take place or whatever. So it's like you can share a bunch of genes, even if you have some of that continuity there. But if you don't go through that same life experience, which we all have our own wholly unique lived experience, that it is nature and nurture, and it's biology and just life experience, and it's not either or. It is like a both and kind of thing, and I think that being able to kind of pull away from that story almost as this like, oh, this is like a sentence, or this is like something like, I don't know, do you feel that like it's like by way of like learning more, like because that experience that he had, what had to be just the most like heart-wrenching thing, and no, and that's not something that you pass down through your genes. That is like something that experientially happened, that ultimately like results in a certain functioning.
Yeah, and on one hand, it was quite a relief to kind of reach these conclusions and feel a little bit liberated that actually, no, I'm the way that I am because of the way that I am. I'm not necessarily, dictated to by the genes. But it's been a really fascinating experience, and I always had, what it's like. You kind of build a mental picture, even if it's like completely self-constructed. And I always thought, here's a sweet man that, that really suffered with it, with a condition.
Yeah.
And it turned out that, yes, he was a very tragic figure. That wasn't down necessarily to mental health or to to bipolar disorder.
Yeah.
It doesn't excuse the things that he did.
Sure.
And, and his behavior and stuff like that. We all have to take ownership of that. But it was kind of liberating that, I don't necessarily think, hey, yeah, there's the mad genes.
You're finding out at this moment, like you said, like very recently, and like getting closer to it and unpacking it, and are as a result changing even your own story as well as your behaviors and your need perhaps to rely on antidepressants even by way of like helping kind of like reframe things. But then you have your offspring, and they don't need to, they're another step away from that origin story that they can be even further liberated from and sort of chart their own path, rather than having to sort of say, cool, yeah, you have the scarlet letter as well, and you need to sort of endure this for all your time. You can there's almost like, yeah, that I love how you said it, that liberation, or that ability to just say, even if there is a part of that there and present, that doesn't dictate what your future holds, right? It's not your destiny or your fate or anything like that to have to be that.
I mean, I don't know why, but I carried a lot of guilt for a great many years about, what he did, and, my mum's decisions around, us not being there and stuff like that. And, I've come to realize that I've got plenty that I've done that I should feel guilty about, but that's not one of them.
That's fascinating. That's really fascinating. What caused you to go on that journey?
I was, I've obviously thought on and off about it for a long time, but I think what really prompted it was that I went to my little brother's wedding, and my little half brother has a half sister, and she was around kind of early teens when my dad did what my dad did. And she was there and around, so she sort of saw this thing through her lens. And I actually met her at a little brother's wedding, and I'd never met her before. This was the first time that I'd ever met her.
Wild.
And she was like, "Oh my God, you look exactly like John," or you look like John would have looked if he'd lived 28 years longer. So that was that kind of I think that's what kind of stimulated it. But I never talked to my mother about it. My mother's 84, 85 now. I'd literally never had a conversation with her about that ever.
Wow. 60
years. Until like 3 months ago, when I said, right, we need to talk about this. I need to hear your side of the story. So that was interesting. But I suppose I don't know. The whole theme, I think, of this podcast, to a certain extent, is nostalgia. And I think you get to a certain point in life or your career where you do sort of reflect on things, take stock a little bit, and think, okay, so, I've done all of that, but what am I going to do for the next, hopefully, 20 years? That's kind of where I am at the moment, is, thinking about, well, you've done all of this stuff. You've worked every day. You've run a small business. You've worked with all of these clients and managed to get away with it without anybody finding out that you were a total fraud.
Fake it. Yeah.
You've managed to con all of these people for such a long time. And, you bought the house and you paid for the cars and you've put money in your pension and you've done all of these things. But kind of like, well, what's next?
Yeah.
And you do get to I suppose turning 60 was, one of those kind of pivotal things.
Yeah. You have this milestone. You've got enough in your rear view mirror that you're able to look back and reflect, hold that up to the light to help inform the road in front of you. And that makes a lot of sense.
And it's making me think about, what am I going to get next week or the week after or the week after that? What am I going to wake up excited about? Because I can only stay excited about oiling a large format camera for so long. I will have collected every piece of vintage Sinar that you can possibly find on eBay. And I'm at the stage now where I would really like to do something that I think is consequential outside of these four walls, whether that would be political or social or whatever it might be. I think that I would really enjoy being able to turn these talents, in inverted commas, into something which can be more consequential than selling printer cartridges. And I haven't found the thing yet, but I would really love to be involved in, particularly in kind of, anti-right-wing, anti-fascist, anti-populist kind of political movements, which we saw in this country in the 1970s, grassroots anti-fascist movements. And we're starting to see the kind of the stirrings of that again. Along with the kind of, the rise of the right wing. And I think that's one of the things that I'd kind of quite like to be involved in. But I just want to do something which is consequential.
I think that's great, that's where your head's at. I'll try something odd with you because this is a lot of like where my head has been, because I feel like I'm in a similar space where it's just like I've done certain activities and done certain things. I've ticked certain things that objectively speaking feel like they, it's like that's what some people describe as success, right? And it's like, okay, cool. Have I done that? Like, yes, I have done that. I've demonstrated, I've proven these points, whatever. What's beyond those things that feel whatever? But so much of my attention has been towards establishing, preserving, and fighting really hard to create and maintain stability for my family. That it forces you inward and kind of in a sort of an egocentric way that I don't like, because I know that that's not what this is all for, but I know that it is very, very important for me to make sure that my family is stable. So that's been, I feel like, where a lot of like my energy and attention is gone. And I want very, very desperately to have to go outward, like you're talking about, to basically go, cool, I have these things, I have these talents, I have these abilities, and I want to point that at something. You know what? I found myself really, really jealous of Mr. Rogers recently. Of Fred Rogers. So Fred Rogers, Pittsburgh's own, Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, kind of legendary
Tom
children's...
Hanks played him in the movie.
Yes. I've
seen the movie, but I'm not familiar with the reference.
In the U.S., he's like as close to like a saint as you can get, right? It's like, here's this person who dedicated their entire life to just the betterment of children's welfare and education. And there's just this rich, like very, very influential in the form of like elevating developmental psychology and helping people understand that no, kids aren't just like little adults, and you don't talk to, like, certain things come online at certain ages, and like all of like that stuff, right, was still pretty in its infancy in that era, right? And he was able to dedicate his entire life to this mission of like kind of, advancing the causes and fighting for children and making sure that people, they weren't being bludgeoned with advertisements and all of this other stuff, and that, teaching parents how to engage with their children in healthy and constructive ways, not punitive and blaming ways, and all of that stuff. Like really, really consequential, impactful work that we continue to benefit from to this day. And I'm like, this is awesome. And as far as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania goes, like he again is just this presence and this person that we can hold up to the entire world as like, yeah, like this is, Pittsburgh zone, right? So it's like a big part of my upbringing and just kind of in the air and stuff. So I recently read his biography, and he grew up with a driver, with like a chef, and his family was like worth like millions upon millions of dollars through industry, right? Pittsburgh's like kind of Manchester, Birmingham, like very, very similar, like working class like cities, right? Like this is, rivers of steel and all of that stuff. And his family's, built their fortune around that. And that was the world that he grew up in. But his family was very generous with their wealth and stuff. But throughout the entire biography, they kind of talk about him taking these big swings and like, here's this nascent technology called television. And he's like, I think I want to like go there. I think I want to like do this. And in fact, I want to like use this as a tool to help children and like help educate children and like all this stuff, like pioneer level stuff. But he didn't have to worry about making 2 and 2 equal 4. He didn't have to worry about like providing that financial stability for his like family, so that he was able to spend more time on that impact. That I found myself being so jealous, and I've been like processing it, because I'm just like, it's very weird to be jealous of a dead guy, I guess. But it's like I see that work, I see that impact, I see that like that real steadfast dedication to a higher purpose, to a goal, to a mission, to a legacy, to really trying to move the needle on society, right? And I want that, but I feel like I've been like fighting so hard to just put the pieces in place so that it's like, is everybody safe? Is everybody healthy? Is everybody just like protected? Is anything bad going to happen? And I feel like that's what I've been like kind of directing my energy towards. And so it's like only now am I starting to kind of like look outwards in a deeper way.
We have to put food on the table. And fortunately, Alex is, 35 or something. So,
that's wild. That's
wild.
nuts.
It's nuts. So I remember the time when the three of us were in Freiburg that time.
Yeah.
And I remember, we'd had some correspondence, and, back in the day when we would comment on each other's blogs or something. So, ooh, Brad Frost is going to be at this event. So, Alex comes along and, you're like, right, let's go out drinking. So Alex is kind of, Alex is out with you, and I'm in the hotel room talking to Sue on the phone going, she's out with his friend Brad.
That's funny.
So it's always been Alex's friend Brad.
That's so funny.
I'm struggling with what it is, because whether it's, and I know what it is, it's a combination of wanting, it's not duty, it's wanting to provide a stable environment and make sure that the kids have got everything that the kids need and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
On one hand. And, on the other hand, or in the same hand, I realize that it's not, I don't work to the level, I haven't worked to the level that I've worked purely to put food on the table. I've done it.
Yeah, sure.
Because it's been a way of kind of escaping free, from negative thoughts or whatever it is. I've created this career and space and, persona or whatever to allow me to be able to deal with myself in the way that I deal with it.
Yeah.
But one of the things that I've been really struggling with is that, and certainly over the last couple of years, and I've had a lot less to do. I mean, this year's been decent, but, the last couple of years, business-wise, have been bloody awful. So I've been inventing things to do rather than actually being paid to do stuff. And, I was thinking, it goes back to your kind of, what wakes you up, what makes you wake up excited. On one hand, I say I want to do something consequential, but I don't know in my heart of hearts I don't know whether, and this is going to sound terrible, but I don't know whether I care enough about people in the way that Mr. Rogers, obviously, or you actually cares about people. Maybe, maybe my consequential thing is to come up with I don't know what it might be, to come up with a thing that people remember. Who knows?
Yeah, you're talking about legacy, right? And talking about sort of like something that feels, you're putting something out into the universe that you feel transcends your four walls and the people in just your life. Yeah. And that doesn't necessarily translate to you're going to go, donate, break the record for donated plasma or something. And it just means that you're going, you have your sights set on something beyond just like the next like kind of client project, which is great.
And whatever that thing is, I'm not exactly sure, because I think that what I've done over the years is that, I've put a lot of my self-worth or identity onto the work that I do and the things that I say and the writing and the trying to, move things in certain directions. And I want to try to find whether it is photography, whether it is something political, whether it is going back and doing, printmaking again. And I need to find that thing that I can do. I wish, I'm very jealous of people I'm very jealous of you that can just go, I'm going to pick up a guitar and I'm going to play it for the pleasure of playing it. And I don't have to, I don't have to be the Rolling Stones. I can just play this thing because I want to play it, and I'm going to put on a gig, and we're going to do a thing, and I'm going to do a ridiculous conference talk where I set it to music or whatever the hell you did in Berlin. I can't, for the life of me, figure out where the hell that came from.
This is what you're talking about, though. This is what I think is like really interesting. What you're describing is that you have this like plethora of activities, right? You have writing, you have like, the client work itself, but all of like these activities that all kind of like ladder up and bring you all the way back to that salesman role, which is like all of these pursuits, all of these activities have been in pursuit of operating a business in order to provide stability for your family. And you've been doing that for a long time. And it sounds like you're understanding that you can kind of point those same things not at that sole pursuit. And that's like where I'm slowly getting to myself, because like there's especially as an independent person, especially as like a responsible business owner and like all of that stuff, you feel like, well, if I'm going to be doing these things, it should all help like ladder up and like help like the greater, the greater good and put the food on the table. That could warp what you put your all of your time and talents and abilities into, right? If you're not careful with it.
I think the other thing is I've got 30 plus years of behavior when it comes to doing creative work, because I've got all the tools downstairs. You can't see it, but downstairs I've got a printing press. I've got all of the lino cutting tools that I would ever need. I've got a stack of lino. I've got a bunch of things that I want to make. And there's a voice in the back of my head going, what are you going to do with this? Why are you doing this? What's the purpose of this? Are you gonna try and sell these things? Where's
your Etsy shop? Yeah, where's your Etsy shop?
What is the purpose of doing it? And the purpose of doing it is just to sit there and, listen to some country music and sit and do lino cuts for the pleasure of doing it, like picking up the Rickenbacker and picking at that purely for the pleasure of doing it. You're not necessarily, needing to make a number one album, and nobody's going to hear what you're playing. And, nobody may see what I'm producing, and it's very hard when you've been working in creative services for so long. There's the sort of the
temptation or just the pull, the gravitational pull, or I don't know. I don't know what it is. Yeah.
But you start to overthink it, and you start to think,
Yep.
well, why am I doing this? What am I going to, who's going to see it? Blah, 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 blah.
How does this how does this all ladder up to me being successfully commercially or monetarily or financially or career wise? Because we've been habituated to run our operations, and that's what you need to think in order to feed your family. Yeah, so like letting go of that is fascinating. Like you should totally like write about that detoxing process, because I want to learn from you. Well, as you learn this,
I'm gonna have to learn it first. But in hopefully 40 years time, when I'm off this mortal coil, nobody is gonna open a box and go, oh yeah, Granddad made websites. Look at that fabulous website he made for a print cartridge development company. But they might open a shoebox and go, wow, he loved lino cutting.
Can I show you something?
Yeah.
Since we're talking about this, I love my mom very much, but she has this tendency to drop off. It's been a steady drip my entire adult life. She just drops off objects from my life Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Quite literally, she was at her house. She was going on a trip with her college roommate. Her college roommate from the early 70s. Like, they were going to visit another college friend. She was at my house. She went back home. Later that night, she drove back to drop off. Remember the CD visors that you would like put on the top of your car, right? With like the little like sleeves. Yeah.
Yeah.
She was just like, here's this. She drove back, especially. She made a special trip back to just deliver me CDs from whenever I was probably, 16, 17, and then left. I'm like, she's like literally getting up at 4 a.m. to go to the airport on a trip with her friend, and she felt so it's very weird. And relationship with things and objects or whatever is very, very fascinating stuff. But one of the things that she recently dropped off was this. And this is her 1974 college yearbook. And for like audio people, it's this like beautiful like silhouette of like a profile of a face, and it's like white, gray, black, and then this like collage-y thing. But she made her yearbook, and she just happened to just drop it off. It's kind of just like a never-ending show and tell, right, with my mom. But she just dropped this object off at my house, and she became an art teacher. Her own kind of like body of work is not, her work has come to life through other people, is like a lot of like how I think of her, like her own like artistic practice is like, there's not a lot of like tangible artifacts of like the things that she herself made. And I was like, wait a minute, did you like design this cover? And she's like, yeah. I was like, what did you use? Cause I'm like, yeah, this is obviously there's pre-Photoshop, is whatever, but just like this split of like the white and the black, typography, and like the typography choice and all of that. I'm like, oh my God, this is awesome.
Awesome. There's going to be
that's the legacy, right? Like that's the legacy.
We can probably guarantee that there is exactly one of those things left in the world, and you've got it, which I find really appealing. Sue and Alex joke about this, but there's one film which I cannot watch. I cannot watch it. Just like, it upsets me. And it's not the film that a lot of people will imagine this is. It's not Love Story or any of these kind of tragic. It's not Philadelphia, or anything like that. It's everybody will go, yeah, but I forget what the character's called now, but he loses his wife at the beginning of the film. Yeah. It's like, is it because he loses his wife that you get so upset? No, I don't get upset at that part at all. I get upset when he loses his stuff. at the end of the film, and the house blows away, and it's got all of the stuff in it.
Yeah.
And it's weird, you know. I've got this Sinar sitting on my desk. I discovered and I renovated this iPod
Beautiful.
Classic the other day, which I found in a box and now works perfectly. I've got also here for the audio folks. Can you recognize this sound? Turn it off and turn it back on again. That's how you make stuff work. You might have to amplify that, but this is my 1997 restored original Game Boy.
Yeah.
There's just something wonderful about objects. I don't know. I find stuff really interesting, which is why there's a big hefty Sinar in parts on my desk.
It's important to note, though, that there's it's not stuff in the consumer, like it's for the meaning behind it. It's for the purpose. It's for the snapshot in time. Like you've been unpacking a lifetime of experience and making sense of the world and your own life and your own family history, even through the lens of like these objects, right? And I think that's really profound. That's not a, I don't know, I just really like expensive bottles of wine. Like, it's like, no. There's really like sort of something a lot deeper. There's an appreciation of craft, but there's also just the fact that these things come from a certain time and a certain place.
Certain place. You know, I'm wearing an expensive IWC watch. You know, I could have bought any number of luxury watch brands, but, you know, a Rolex or an AP or a, you know, whatever makes no sense whatsoever. You know, I'm not in it for the, you know, for the brand or for the object per se. I love this thing because it looks nice, and it's not showy, but also of that connection with Schaffhausen and how I remember the guys that were working there in Switzerland when I used to go there would all wear IWCs, and, you know, because they were just down the road. And there's this kind of, you know, they were, you know, skilled engineers. IWC obviously has skilled engineers. And it's that reason. I don't like the, you know, sometimes you see this on social media where I hate the algorithm where something comes across, and unless you flick past it quick enough, you then start to get a deluge of people buying or selling expensive Hermes handbags.
Yeah.
You know, that kind of thing actually makes me want to retch.
Well, there's something too. It's like, I think that, consumerism and objects and luxury goods and just the physical, like all of that stuff, just in the status that comes with it. Like, obviously that's been around like for a while, you know, go to any museum and you're going to see some rich people's well-crafted stuff. But I do think that there is sort of something to what you demonstrate really well with your appreciation of stuff is appreciation. There's appreciation of the design, appreciation of the craft. There's also kind of a scarcity part of it. There's a nostalgia component to it, but these are like living reminders that as you continue to produce work and put it out into the world, right, you're able to look at these objects from a previous era and understand the weight of it, and to try to incorporate that and try to capture some of that in the work that you're putting forward into the world. That
this Sinar, I was sitting outside in my front garden about a month and a half ago, and I get a video call from Alex, who is speaking at a conference in Vienna, has a day off. Alex loves cameras and loves photography, so is mooching around with some friends around Vienna, stumbles across this camera shop and sees this Sinar in the window, and is immediately on a FaceTime call with me, going, "Is this what I think it is?" And half of me was really excited about the the fact that yes, here was a really brilliant example of a P2 that I could own. Probably a bigger part of me was Alex's reaction and the fact that Alex knew what this thing was and was interested enough or savvy enough to call me up.
They
and I'm
see
thinking,
you. They see you.
My work is done.
Yeah,
Alex knows what a large format camera looks like.
it's beautiful. Like, but they see you, and to have that visceral reaction and to call like that, and that being across geography, you're in different locations, to have that connection over a shared love. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, no, it was fabulous, and I ummed and ahed about it, and I found it online. Alex sent me a photograph. So the shop was closed, so Alex sent me a photograph of the opening hours with the website address, and for a week or two, I'm kind of umming and ahhing about this, and Alex is like, "You should just buy it," and I'm like, "Yeah, but there's plenty of other things that I can spend, $1,500 on. There's more important things." And whatever. Alex, just fucking buy it. And Sue's got this rule, which I think is brilliant, which is if you see something and you really like it, but you're thinking in the back of your mind, you're thinking, should I buy it? Should I buy it? It's like, if you were to come back tomorrow to buy it and it wasn't there anymore, would you regret it?
Yeah.
And I think I would definitely have regretted not buying this particular object.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it'd be fundamentally different if you just happened to be stumbling upon yourself. But the fact that, your own kin just is able to channel and convey that enthusiasm for it. It's like that's really what it's about, and I think that's freaking beautiful.
And we got it. We were staying at Alex's flat in Germany, and this thing we got it shipped there to don't tell the customs, but we got it shipped there so I could drive it back to the UK. And we get the thing out of the box, or I'm putting it together, and I'm explaining what all the knobs do, and how it controls the sharpness across different planes and does all of this kind of technical stuff that view cameras do. And that was just a very nice kind of shared experience.
Yeah, no, that's great. We can bond and create connection and appreciate things together and use these things as ways to get closer to one another. And
it's a cumulative thing. It's my history with the company and the cameras and all the stories around the photo shoots that I was at, and all of that kind of stuff. And it's the craftsmanship around the object, and it's the fact that we've got this kind of shared connection. And all of those kind of things. I think it's a joy.
I had a friend over to play some music last weekend, and he brought out this Gibson Les Paul, beautiful guitar, and he says this is a really special moment because this is my dad's. And this is the thing that I would be sitting on his knee, and he would be showing me, the chord shapes and the rest of it. And he described how he had to rescue this thing from a pawn shop when his dad, kind of fell on some hard times. But he was like, "What do you mean you pawned the guitar?" And so he had to really go in and fight and kind of get it back. And that he was like, one day I never was like, "Hey Dad, could I, have that guitar?" But he was just like, he thought of it as theirs. And he said that recently his dad was like, "Hey, I would like you to have this." And he's like, I wasn't prepared for how emotional that would be. I just thought that I was like, this is this. I hold this thing as this sacred thing. But he said that he just really his dad did a lot of, it sounds like a lot of contemplation, and here's a son who's a damn good guitar player. Boy, oh boy, is he super talented and very deserving of an instrument like that. So he busted this out for the first time in my basement. And I was like, man, this feels like a really a special moment to like have this kind of full circle thing. But all to say is just like words are often hard. It's hard to say like I love you sometimes. It's like I don't really come from like a family like that, and there's other things, but there's all these like just different vessels and ways to foster that connection, and these objects and stuff can do a good job at kind of shouldering some of that load or to make that connection a little easier.
Well, hopefully, I'm desperately hoping that the mailman will bring me a tripod tomorrow so that I can properly assemble this thing. And
amazing.
And of course, me being me, I couldn't just go and buy a tripod on Amazon. I've had to actually find a 1990s Foba tripod for this thing to go on.
I mean, that checks out. That checks out. If you're skirting customs and driving across countries,
mention don't mention that.
Yeah. Don't put that thing on a $30 rickety tripod. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, no, this it's gonna have pride of place just over there. I'll send you a photo when it's up.
There we go.
It'll definitely be on my socials.
There we go. Please do. Well, that might be. We'll steer people to your socials here in a second. But so the only other structured question on the show is what music would you like more people to know about?
See, I always joke that my musical listening stopped in about 1979.
That's okay.
I have a very eclectic music taste. I do listen to a huge amount of modern country music. So, whether it's Megan Maroney or Miranda Lambert or, a lot of these kind of country artists. I listen to a lot of country music. More, actually, goes against brand. My persona shouldn't really admit this, but, I listen
to the mod style.
I listen to an awful lot more country music than I listen to Motorhead, although I do love Motorhead. But see, Motorhead was a shared experience. I grew up listening to Motorhead and going to Motorhead gigs when Alex was old enough. Despite the fact that I'm absolutely sure Alex really doesn't like Motorhead, we used to go every November and go and see them play in Manchester. So there's
beautiful.
That kind of thing.
Beautiful.
What would I want people to listen to more? We had this thing on we did a crossover on the Unfinished Business One Footer podcast that I do with John Hicks and Paul Bragg and Richard Rutter and Marcus and Lillington. And we had a whole kind of musical episode. And it's like, well, if you could have if you could take one or two tracks on a desert island or on a spaceship, if you were marooned on Mars, what would be the music that you'd listen to? And all of mine was like, Bat Out of Hell and old Led Zeppelin tracks.
You're bringing Meatloaf to the desert island?
I would take Meatloaf to Mars. Absolutely. Here's what people should listen to. It goes back to my kind of upbringing and it resonates with today's political, cultural problems, is I think people should listen to early Billy Bragg.
Okay.
So lots of, union supporting, anti-conservative, definitely anti-fascist stuff. This is way before he did the stuff with the Woody Guthrie stuff with Wilco and other things. So early Billy Bragg, Life's a Riot with Spy versus Spy, some of the early stuff, Between the Wars, there's Power in the Union, all of this kind of stuff. So go and find the first 3 Billy Bragg albums.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's great because that's I come in at the Wilco part, so that's going to be good. That's my homework for after this. It's fantastic.
One bit of trivia is that when I was in a band many moons ago, we actually supported Billy Bragg on his first tour It was a coal miners supporters gig during the big famous miners strike over here. And it was
Amazing.
just Bill and his trumpeter. And I've still got the backstage pass. I wasn't any good, by the way, just in case anybody thinks I'm like, I could join your Frostapalooza. They literally only hired me because back in the 1980s, 70s, 80s, I still had cheekbones. I would be the enigmatic keyboard player that would stand behind a synthesizer, sucking his cheekbones.
Hey, you're doing an important service for the greater good there. But
yes,
that's fantastic. Yeah. But to have that continuity as well. It's all lived experience.
Well, I still have this backstage pass, which Bill signed for me back in, I think it was about 1981, 82, something like this. Anyway,
beautiful.
Alex and I go to see Bill play. I will go relatively regularly if I can. But Alex and I went to see Bill play in Liverpool. At the end of the gig, I walked round to the stage door and gave this backstage pass to the bouncer and said, "Can you ask Bill if this is still valid?" And about 5 minutes later, the bouncer came back and said, "Come with me." So we ended up going back and, Alex, yes, I've got photos of Alex looking very confused next to Billy Bragg.
Well played. That is very, very good. That was a smooth move right there.
Oh, yeah. So that was that.
Oh, beautiful. Well, yeah. So, all right. So listen to some early Billy Bragg. I guess the last question then is where can people follow along with what you're up to and look at your camera progress as well as your online work and all of the rest of it?
Well, obviously, I'm a huge star on TikTok. No, that's
Clearly.
not true. That's not true whatsoever. I don't think I've even got TikTok installed. People can usually find me the old-fashioned way, which is on my website, which is stuffandnonsense.co.uk. All of the links to my various kind of social meanderings are on there. But yeah,
that is one of the most influential websites in my career. So thank you for continuing to be old-fashioned and keeping Stuff and Nonsense going.
It's still there. It's still there. I think I ought to, when we finish this, I think I need to go and drink an old-fashioned. I think I've been wallowing in nostalgia for the last 2 hours.
Well, I appreciate that wallowing and going down there, but there's something, I think that you did a good job at sort of wielding nostalgia for charting a path forward. I think that there's something really powerful in that emotion and that sentiment that is a very directional force. So thank you for painting that picture.
I'm not going to leave it with your listeners thinking that I'm in any way sentimental. That would be really bad for the brand. Aren't I supposed to be some kind of hideous badass?
The listener decide. No comment. Well, thank you. Thanks a ton for being here. This is really great. It's great to catch up and
yeah, it's been wonderful.
Great to chat again. Yeah.
Are you heading over this way anytime soon? To this side
I need
of
to make that
pond?
happen. I need to make that happen. So this is the work in front of me. Not this year, but perhaps next year. So we'll make it happen.
If you come over to this continent, let me know.
Love it. I love it. All right. Well, take care. And
thanks,
if you're
mate.
still here, thanks for listening. Bye.